Welcome back to the deep dive. This week, we're looking at a really major diplomatic event from September 2025. We've gathered sources on the formal recognition of Palestinian statehood by three key U.S. allies, the UK, Canada, and Australia. Now, if you track geopolitics at all, you know this is huge, a real shockwave. And the reactions were, well, immediate and completely opposed. Some sources call it essential, to revive the hope of peace and a two-state solution. Others, they're dismissing it flat out as, and this is a direct quote, nothing but a reward for jihadist Hamas.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder of how divided views are on this. One action, two completely different interpretations. So our job today is to really unpack this. It's a highly symbolic move, no doubt, but also deeply serious. We need to look at the timing, why now, and the stated reasons from London, Canberra, and Ottawa, plus the backlash, both internationally and domestically within those countries, and maybe most importantly, well, what does this recognition actually do? What are the practical implications, if any?
Right. It feels like one of those moments where the symbolism, initially at least, might outweigh the sort of concrete changes on the ground. Okay, let's get into the announcement itself. Because the way it happened, coordinated, sequential, that gave it real punch, Canada actually went first. Prime Minister Mark Carney, announcement via social media, made them the first G7 nation to recognize Palestine.
Which is, in itself, pretty noteworthy, breaking ranks with the traditional G7 consensus, especially vis-a-vis the U.S. position.
Definitely. Then, almost immediately, Australia followed, Prime Minister Albanese, and then the UK, with Prime Minister Keir Starmer making a formal address.
And the UK's involvement, well, that added a whole other layer of significance.
Because of the history.
Exactly. Britain's historical role, leading up to Israel's creation, the Mandate, and its long-standing alliance with Israel. For the UK government to make this move, it suggests a really profound shift, maybe a sign that patience with the status quo is wearing thin among key Western allies.
Okay, so what were they actually saying? What was the official justification?
Well, they were surprisingly unified on that front. Starmer, for the UK, put it very directly. He said the move was needed to, quote, revive the hope of peace and a two-state solution. But he was also really careful, almost meticulous, in stressing that this was not intended as a reward for Hamas. He knew that criticism was coming.
Yeah, you can see them trying to get ahead of that narrative immediately because the pushback was guaranteed.
Absolutely. And our sources indicate this isn't happening in a vacuum.
Right. France and some other European nations were expected to follow suit pretty quickly, maybe at the UN General Assembly.
That's the expectation. And if that happens, you're looking at over 150 nations worldwide formally recognizing Palestine.
Wow, over 150.
It's overwhelming diplomatic support, really. Even if the practicalities are murky, politically, it isolates opponents of recognition. It definitely boosts the international legitimacy of Palestinian statehood, even while, the actual functioning of such a state seems, well, distant.
So, speaking of murky practicalities, the UK did try to add some clarity, or maybe conditions is the better word. This wasn't just a blank check recognition. Starmer laid out a specific vision, specific demands.
Yes, this is crucial. He was extremely clear that from the UK's perspective, recognition meant Hamas, quote, can have no future, no role in government, no role in security.
Strong words. Did they back that up with anything?
Well, he did direct officials to prepare sanctions against other Hamas figures, supposedly in the coming weeks. So in an attempt to show they're serious about that condition.
Okay, so conditions on the Palestinian side, what about towards Israel?
That's the other side of the coin. Starmer didn't hold back there either. He explicitly urged the Israeli government to lift border restrictions, stop what his government termed cruel tactics, and allow a surge in humanitarian aid. And he directly linked this to the fading prospects for peace, warning that accelerating settlement construction and related escalation were making a two-state solution impossible.
So it's a message to both sides then.
Definitely. And when UK officials sketched out their vision for a post-war Palestinian state, it involved Hamas being disarmed.
Which sounds difficult.
Extremely. And elections for the Palestinian Authority leadership within a year. This connects to that wider diplomatic effort, the New York Declaration.
Can you just remind us briefly what that declaration involves?
Sure. It's basically a framework backed by key Arab states like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. It sets out benchmarks for how Gaza and the West Bank should be governed after the conflict. Essentially, international support and funding for statehood, but only if there's a reformed, non-militant Palestinian Authority chosen through elections that can actually govern and provide security.
Ah, Okay, so the UK is trying to hitch its recognition to that existing Arab-backed plan for PA reform.
Exactly. They're trying to say, we recognize the state in principle, but its viability depends on following this internationally agreed path.
But, I mean, how realistic is that? Demanding Hamas disarm, demanding elections under occupation. Doesn't that require a level of intervention or enforcement that, frankly, the UK and others seem unwilling to commit to?
That's the fundamental tension, isn't it? It's using a diplomatic tool recognition to try and force movement on the ground
Mm.
under incredibly difficult circumstances. Starmer framed it as a pledge, to both Israelis and Palestinians that there can be a better future.
So a symbolic carrot tied to a very specific, very demanding roadmap.
Pretty much. Here's the symbol of statehood. Now follow these steps.
Yeah.
That seems to be the message.
Okay, but as you mentioned earlier, that nuanced message got kind of lost in the immediate, very loud opposition. We have to look at that backlash, starting with Israeli officials.
Yeah, the reaction from Jerusalem was swift and incredibly harsh.
The foreign ministry, Netanyahu spokesperson, they called the recognition absurd and went straight for that line, nothing but a reward for jihadist Hamas, explicitly tying it to the October 7th attacks.
Yes. Some sources even quote them claiming Hamas leaders saw the recognition as a direct result, a fruit of that violence.
That phrase, reward for jihadist Hamas, it's designed to be politically toxic, isn't it?
Absolutely. It forces a debate domestically in the UK, Canada, Australia. Are you siding with a democratic ally or rewarding terror? It's potent political framing.
And we saw that play out in the UK, right? The domestic opposition.
We did. Kemi Badenoch, the conservative leader, called Labour's decision absolutely disastrous. Her argument was similar. It rewards terrorism, effectively, with no real conditions met, and ignores the plight of hostages still held in Gaza.
Okay, so fierce opposition from Israel, fierce opposition from UK conservatives, but what about Palestinians themselves in the West Bank?
Well, the sources paint a more complex picture there. There was apparently a universal welcome for the recognition itself. I mean, it's a symbolic win. But beneath that, significant reservations.
A sense of diplomatic fatigue, maybe.
Like, thanks for the symbol, but what now? Exactly. We have this quote from Abu Said. It is not enough to recognize in itself. We need actions and implementation. It captures that feeling perfectly.
And if the people it's meant to support are skeptical, doesn't that kind of undercut the whole point of trying to revive hope?
It certainly raises that question. And this quote from Mohammed Rizk, a librarian in Ramallah, really hits that nail on the head. He called it symbolic only. And then he asks the killer question, what are the borders of the state they are recognizing? Does anyone know?
Yeah.
Has anyone said it is only to pacify us? If you recognize the state but don't define its territory, what have you actually recognized? It highlights the gap between the diplomatic gesture and the reality of governance.
Which leads us right to the core question. What does this recognition actually change, practically, on the ground? The sources suggest, maybe not much immediately, but there are a couple of potential concrete steps, at least for the UK.
Right. Two main things mentioned. First, upgrading the Palestinian mission in London to a full embassy.
Okay, symbolic but diplomatically concrete. It signals more permanent formal relations.
Exactly. The second one is potentially more impactful, though politically tricky.
Which is?
It could open the door to banning products imported from Israeli settlements in the occupied territories.
Ah, okay. And Canada and Australia are reportedly looking at that, too.
Yes. And while they aren't defining the borders of Palestine yet, banning settlement goods effectively starts defining the borders they don't recognize as part of Israel.
So it's a kind of backdoor border definition, an economic pressure point on the settlements that Starmer himself criticized.
Precisely. It's a way to put some economic teeth into the recognition, targeting the very settlements seen as undermining the two-state solution.
But even that, is it enough? Human rights groups certainly don't seem to think so.
No, they see it as far too little. We have Amnesty International's Christian Benedict calling recognition a hollow gesture, unless it's paired with much stronger action.
What kind of action are they demanding?
Amnesty's position is clear. Recognition means nothing if the UK doesn't act decisively to end what they describe as genocide, illegal occupation, and system of apartheid.
Strong language again.
Very. And they have a specific list of demands for the UK government.
Like what?
Halt all UK arms exports to Israel immediately. That's a huge political ask.
A real third rail issue, yeah.
Sanction Israeli officials implicated in crimes under international law. stop all trade with the settlements, not just specific products, and respect the Palestinian right of return.
Okay, so these aren't small adjustments. This is a call for a fundamental shift in UK policy towards Israel and the conflict.
Absolutely. The sources suggest that implementing even one of those demands would likely cause a much bigger political firestorm than the recognition itself did.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive really highlights a central tension, doesn't it? You have this major diplomatic move framed as an attempt to save the two-state solution,
hmm
but it's immediately slammed by critics as rewarding terrorism.
And at the same time, viewed as largely symbolic, almost empty, by Palestinians and rights groups who want concrete actions and defined borders.
It's quite the bind.
It is. And if you look at the big picture, you have this growing global momentum for recognition over 150 countries, potentially more soon, happening right alongside this widespread feeling, even stated by leaders like Starmer, that the actual possibility of a two-state solution is fading, slipping away.
So why do it then, if the hope is fading?
Well, the underlying motivation, particularly for the UK, seems to be about preservation, maybe desperation. There's a clear worry, reflected in the sources, that the current Israeli government intends to make a viable Palestinian state impossible through settlement expansion, annexation, or creating conditions that push Palestinians out.
So recognition is like planting a flag, trying to preserve the idea of a state before it's completely erased on the map.
That seems to be a big part of it, a last-ditch diplomatic effort to keep the concept alive, even if the pathway there is blocked.
Okay, so here's the final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. The UK, Canada, and Australia hope this recognition might somehow help keep the door open for two states, countering forces they see trying to slam it shut permanently. But given the instant fierce opposition and the deep skepticism, even from Palestinians, about undefined borders and lack of practical change, what comes next? What specific diplomatic actions, going beyond just the symbol of recognition, could actually make the hope of coexistence feel tangible again, rather than just a fading political vision? That's the question hanging in the air.